All right, so you're here because you want to know what's really going on.
Right.
You want the truth. You want to cut through the noise and get to the heart of the matter.
Absolutely.
And today we're diving into something really sticky,
Okay.
the world of fake honey.
Oh, wow.
So we've been digging into reports from all over the planet, and we've got a pretty good grasp on just how big this problem is
Yeah, and it's a big
and
one.
how widespread this deception is.
Right.
So we want to make sure that you know what's going on, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's just jump right in.
Okay.
What's really striking, I think, right off the bat is just the sheer scale of this problem.
Yeah,
This isn't just some, small-time thing. This is a huge global trend.
it is. It's a massive problem.
So let's look at some of these numbers. In the EU, there was a recent coordinated effort to test honey,
Uh-huh.
and they found that a whopping 36% of samples were suspicious.
Wow.
That's a huge jump from, I think it was 14% just a few years ago.
Yeah, that's a massive
It's
increase.
getting worse. And some countries are being hit really hard.
Hmm.
Austria, for example, almost 3 out of 4 samples tested were flagged.
Yeah, I saw that.
And in Germany, some reports say that up to 80% of the honey in supermarkets
Wow.
could be fake.
80%.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, that's a lot of honey.
Now, if we look at the U.S., the FDA has found somewhat lower violation rates for imported honey. I think it was around 3% recently.
Okay.
However, the Honey Authenticity Project estimates that up to a third of honey globally
Hmm.
could be fake.
Wow.
And some suggest that the number in the U.S. could be much higher than what the FDA is finding.
Right.
So right there, we have a problem,
Yeah.
right? We have a difference in the numbers.
Huge discrepancy. Yeah.
How are we testing and what are we looking for?
Exactly.
So a third of honey globally and potentially more in the U.S., that is just an incredible amount of fake honey out there.
It is, and it seems that some regions are being hit harder than others. EU studies have pointed to China and Turkey as having a larger proportion of suspect honey shipments. But it's really hard to get a handle on the exact scale of the problem
Right.
globally
But
because,
changing.
well, yeah, the methods of adulteration are constantly evolving, and there's no standardized testing worldwide. So, it's like trying to hit a moving target.
Right, right. It's this constantly shifting landscape, so it's hard to get a firm number on a global scale.
Exactly.
So how are they doing it?
Right.
How are they making this fake honey? What are they putting in it?
Well, the main driver, as you can imagine, is money.
Right.
They're using cheap sugar syrups to either stretch the real honey or replace it altogether.
Right.
So we're talking about common syrups like high fructose corn syrup, but also rice syrup, beet, sugar, cane sugar, you name it.
Okay.
Even things like inverted sugar syrup and malt sweeteners are being used.
So basically anything that's sweet and cheap.
Pretty much, yeah. And it's all about the economics. Rice syrup, for example, is a fraction of the cost of imported honey.
Yeah.
So it's a tempting substitute for folks who are trying to cut corners.
Right, right. So are there any other methods they're using besides just swapping out the honey for these syrups?
Oh, yeah, they've got a whole bag of tricks. One is simply adding water.
Okay, to bulk it up?
Yeah, exactly. Increase the volume. Another trick is using artificial sweeteners
Mmm.
to boost the sweetness without drastically affecting the sugar tests.
So sneaky.
Yeah, and then there's the old classic adding coloring agents to make it look more appealing.
Oh, wow. So they really are trying to cover all their bases.
Yeah, they are. And there's another kind of adulteration that's harder to detect. It's called indirect adulteration.
Okay.
And this is where beekeepers feed their bees sugar syrups during nectar collection.
Oh, so the bees are basically making honey from sugar water.
Yeah, essentially, which then blurs the lines of what's real honey and what's not.
Right, right. So it's getting harder and harder to tell the difference.
It really is. They're getting more and more sophisticated. They're using syrups that mimic the natural sugar ratios found in real honey. And they're even using enzymes to try and hide the fact that these other substances have been added.
Wow, it's like a constant arms race.
It is a constant game of cat and mouse with the testing labs.
So for those of us who are, just buying honey at the store,
Yeah,
what can we look for?
right.
Are there any telltale signs that what we're buying might not be the real deal?
Well, home tests aren't foolproof, but they can sometimes give you some clues visually. You want to be wary of honey that looks too uniform in color or has an unusual color.
Okay.
Real honey tends to have some variation in color,
Right.
and real honey is generally thick, but if it's super runny, that could be a sign of dilution.
Okay.
Crystallization is a natural process for many pure honeys, although not all honeys crystallize.
Right.
So don't assume that just because your honey has crystallized, it's fake.
Okay. Good to know. What about the taste and texture?
Yeah, so real honey has a complex sweetness.
Uh-huh.
It's not just one-dimensional. You often get floral undertones and other subtle flavors,
Right.
whereas fake honey might taste overly sweet or artificial. And the texture should be smooth, not excessively sticky, which can be another sign of added syrups.
I've seen all those, honey tests online. The
Yeah.
water test, the flame test, all that stuff.
Mhm.
Are those actually reliable?
Those kinds of home tests can be fun to try,
Yeah.
but they're not scientific.
Right.
And they're not going to give you a definitive answer about whether your honey is pure or not.
So what's the best approach then if you're buying honey? What should people do?
Well, I always say check the label carefully. Look for the country of origin and be wary of vague labels like blend of EU and non-EU honeys without any specific proportions.
Okay.
Your best bet is often buying directly from local beekeepers.
Right. So supporting local and getting that kind of transparency and knowing where it comes from.
Exactly.
So that makes sense. But what about the testing that's being done in labs?
You're right.
What are the experts finding and what kind of tests are they using?
Well, labs are using a whole array of methods.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the traditional tests look at sugar content, moisture levels, and the presence of certain enzymes. But there are also more advanced techniques like isotopic analysis, which can detect syrups derived from different types of plants.
How does that work?
Well, it's based on the fact that different plants have unique carbon fingerprints.
Oh, interesting.
So by analyzing the carbon isotopes in the honey, they can tell if it's been adulterated with syrups from things like corn or rice.
Wow.
And then there's DNA analysis,
Uh-huh.
which can pinpoint the specific floral sources of the honey and even its geographical origin.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and then there's NMR profiling, which creates a very detailed chemical snapshot of the honey
Okay.
and can be used to detect adulteration.
So what have these tests revealed
Right.
on a larger scale? What are we learning from these sophisticated tests?
Well, global testing has uncovered a pretty significant level of adulteration in supermarket honey,
Right.
often with undeclared syrups like rice wheat and beet sugar,
Mm.
and even some well-known brands have been implicated.
Oh, wow. So nobody's safe.
It seems that way.
So we're getting better at detecting this fraud. But the lack of global standardization is still a major hurdle.
It is. It makes it very difficult to get a truly accurate picture of the problem worldwide.
And this probably explains why there's often a big price difference between supermarket honey and honey that you'd buy directly from a beekeeper.
Yeah, absolutely. In many parts of the world, locally produced honey can be considerably more expensive than the blends you find in the supermarket.
Right.
And those super low prices, especially for blended honey, should be a red flag.
Yeah, buyer beware.
Exactly. The higher prices you see from beekeepers typically reflect the true costs of production and the authenticity of the product.
So bottom line, fake honey is a widespread and constantly evolving problem.
Yeah, unfortunately it is.
For our listeners out there, what are the key takeaways? What should they remember from all of this?
Well, first and foremost, try to buy your honey from local beekeepers whenever possible.
Okay, support local.
Yeah, and always check the label carefully. Look for the country of origin.
Right.
And be very wary of honey that's being sold at a price that seems too good to be true.
If it seems too good to be true,
It probably is.
it probably is. All right, so here's something for everyone to think about.
Okay.
With these increasingly sophisticated methods of food fraud,
Right.
how can we as consumers ever really be sure that what we're buying is authentic? And what responsibility do the food industry and regulators have in ensuring the integrity of our food supply?
That's the big question.
That is the big question.
Yeah.
All right, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the sticky world of fake honey.
Fascinating topic.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.